My husband and I were flying to Florida for a much-needed vacation. And after we dragged ourselves through security, we sat down to reassemble all of our stuff, and glancing up, we observed an odd and troubling scene behind the airport information desk. I said to my husband, "That looks inappropriate." Weird was the word my husband used, as we watched a uniformed male employee repeatedly stroke a female employee's face sitting in front of him. "Is he giving her a facial massage?" my husband asked. "No, I think he's putting some sort of makeup or cream on her face," I said. We shamelessly stared at them. "There must be some rules against employees publicly touching one another like that. Snap a picture with your cell phone," I said. And so I stood up to snap a picture, and immediately I saw things from an entirely different perspective. The woman was confined to a wheelchair. Her arms and her hands were useless, curled tightly at her sides. And her fellow employee was tenderly rubbing moisturizer, makeup, or something into her parched skin. And my heart sank. How quick I was to jump to conclusions and to judge his actions as wrong. How naturally and automatically I made up a story about what I saw when in fact I did not see clearly at all. At first glance, this man's behavior appeared unquestionably inappropriate, but it was only when I saw things from a whole different vantage point did I discern that his actions were actually the opposite. They were kind and generous and gracious. In the same way, Jesus repeatedly attempted to show the religious leaders of his day that everything wasn't the way they saw it or they thought it was. Things are not so easily explained in terms of what they thought was lawful or right or wrong. For example, Rahab, the prostitute, was spared by Joshua because she protected the spies from being captured by lying about which way they went, even though one of the 10 Commandments forbids us to bear false witness. When Jesus didn't follow the Jewish law when the woman was caught in adultery, as the crowd expected him to, instead of sentencing her to death by stoning, he said, "Whoever's without sin here, you can cast the first stone." The Pharisees condemned Jesus as a lawbreaker when he healed on the Sabbath, yet he challenged their deeply held beliefs by asking them, which one of you wouldn't rescue a son or even your ox on the Sabbath if they had fallen into a deep well? Jesus taught that doing good, helping others, and loving well was more important to God than legalistic adherence to biblical law. So what does that mean to you and to me? Every day we have the opportunity to peer into a small section of someone's life story, like I did with the 2 airport employees. And we often make judgments and create stories, oftentimes untrue, of what we think we see. Other times people may invite us to look into their life, to give them advice or biblical wisdom about what they're doing or thinking or feeling. And sometimes we judge them as wrong or right, biblical or sinful, godly or worldly. And at times, I've been guilty of using the Bible as a rule book to find what God says is permissible or unacceptable. But even Jesus had exceptions to his laws. And the laws of love and mercy, justice and faithfulness always triumphed. As I listen to people's stories, I ask myself, is there only one right biblical answer for every situation? So ask yourself some crucial questions when facing these kind of dilemmas. What is the whole counsel of God? Not just 1 or 2 verses. What's the context? Not just the biblical context, but the client or the person's life story. You just can't take a single observation and make up a judgment about it. Just as I was very wrong in my initial assessment at the airport of what was really happening, sometimes we can't discern what's really right or what's really wrong unless we change our vantage point, which might open our eyes to an entirely different perspective. Third, what are the biblical exceptions? When were they permitted? And sometimes even commended. For example, when the woman poured expensive perfume all over Jesus' head, the disciples judged it to be a waste of a valuable resource. They said this is money that could feed the poor for a whole year. Jesus thought otherwise, and through this example taught us that even what seems right or logical isn't the only biblical way to make a good decision. Although what she did was extravagant, Jesus said she will always be remembered for her great love. In striving to be Christ-centered, I'm learning more and more that there's often more than one biblical answer. And my job, nor is it yours, is to judge or decide for another person what's biblical or not. Perhaps the best thing we can do if we're a people helper is to help someone view his or her situation from different vantage points. For example, the temporal, the eternal, the short term, the long term, and talk about what God might be up to in a particular situation and to listen to the Holy Spirit so that they can learn to walk by faith and not by sight. How about you? Do you tend to be the biblical answer person instead of helping your friend learn to listen to God's voice for herself?